Hello and welcome. This is going to be our first session of Architects of the Future. I'm recording this because a lot of people couldn't make the first session, and we're actually live streaming this now on Facebook too. Share this with someone in my network as well to give an intro of what it is I'm working on. So I want to welcome you. I hope this is one of the most useful sessions you have this year. This is what I'm most excited about, and this is the foundation for what we do in the rest of the class. Talking about signals. What are signals? What are weak signals? What are these tools that you use to figure out what the future is, or what's possible for the future? We don't forecast, we use foresight. And that's an important difference we're going to talk about today. And I'm also going to make sure that you understand today how to use scenarios, how to build scenarios, and how to use these scenarios to test your plan, to test what it is you're doing. And finally, we use a third tool called Flip Futures, which is something that allows you to really stretch your creativity and stretch your mindset. What you're thinking is possible. So by the end of this class today, I want you to have tools that you can start using immediately. We're going to move from theory to practice relatively quickly. We're going to talk very briefly about the theory behind this and the models and the tools we have. You can pause at the places where I've left activities for you to do, and you can do them on your own, and then set up a time with me to call and speak about those, or bring them up next class. And we're looking to figure out how we figure out what are possible futures. Again, we'll have a methodology we use called Shift. We have another tool called Steeple. These are both acronyms that will explain in much more detail. We're going to dive right into this, but before I go too far into that, I want to start out with explaining to you what it is why we're doing this, why it's important. So we look at Foresight, we look at who are the winners and losers of this. Who are the companies that have used this? Who are the ones that didn't? What separates those companies that thrive during disruption, those that get blindsided by it? It's not luck. It's not just resources, though it does help that some of these companies shown here did have a lot of resources. It's foresight, it's the ability to see change coming from corners and prepare for it systemically. So some examples. One is going way back. Maybe it's a bit old, but it's important because it's the first major company to use strategic foresight. This is Shell Oil back in the 1970s. While most oil companies were focused on forecasting prices, optimizing productions, Shell did something different. They built detailed scenarios about different possible futures. One scenario explored what would happen if oil producing nations suddenly restricted supply to pressure Western governments. Most executives thought this was far-fetched, but it was one of the many options that Shell considered as a possibility. They didn't forecast and say, this is exactly what's going to happen, but rather they used foresight to say, this is one of the possible options. This is one of the things that could happen. So when the 73 oil crisis hit and OPEC imposed an embargo and oil prices quadrupled overnight, Shell was ready. They had contingency plans. They had flexible supply chains. They had strategic reserves. They thrived while their competitors scrambled. That's part of the power of strategic foresight. So that's way back. Let's go a little bit more modern, still back in time a bit. Tesla into the 2010s. Elon Musk didn't just see electric vehicles and think, yeah, that's possible. Lots of people knew electric vehicles were possible. Lots of people could see that coming. But he saw the convergence of three key signals. Battery costs were declining rapidly, climate awareness reaching a tipping point, and software was becoming a key differentiator in cars. While traditional automakers were making incremental improvements to internal combustion engines, Tesla was building the future. They saw the signals, they connected the dots, and they acted on the scenarios they had built. Third success case, Zoom before COVID. When Eric Yuan founded Zoom in 2011, he had the thesis that work would increasingly become distributed and that video communication would need to be seamless. While everyone else was focused on conference room solutions, Zoom built for individual users and mobile devices. We all know this already, but when the pandemic hit, they were perfectly positioned. They had 30 times growth in 1 year. That happens when we prepare for the future instead of just reacting to the present. And yet, related to COVID, there was actually a super scenario not shown in the slide here, that was done in 2010, where about 20,000 people in North America participated in a scenario of what would happen if a respiratory flu that was more infectious than anything we'd seen before spread quickly through North America. The model of the scenario they went through ended up being really similar to what actually happened in 2019. So this was something that people who'd been through it, they felt more ready when the actual crisis hit. Again, people back in 2010 who created that scenario weren't saying this will happen, but they were saying this is a possibility. What would it look like? So they engaged a massive group of people, 20,000 people, to participate. And those people made journals, wrote about what they were doing. This helped researchers and policymakers also be better prepared in what they did and their responses and the ideas of how the public would respond. Now, to the other side, what happens when you don't use foresight? So this is one example, Kodak. My hometown is Rochester, where Kodak is from. So that's played a big impact in all of my life. You know, Kodak, the company, Kodak as the philanthropist who's built a lot of things in that city in my hometown. When I was a kid, Kodak employed about 60,000 people in Rochester, plus tens of thousands in suppliers and companies that were vendors to Kodak. And back in 1975, Steve Sasson, a Kodak engineer, he invented the first digital camera. The company saw the signal. They knew digital was coming, but they made the choice, a fatal choice. They decided to protect their film business instead of cannibalizing it. They had the future in their hands, and they decided to ignore it. And Kodak was bankrupt in 2012 and has obviously had massive layoffs since then, as you may have seen. I believe now in my home city, they employ about 3,000 people, not 60, but three. Nokia, another strong example of this, in 2007, they were the world's largest mobile phone manufacturer. Everybody on this call at some point has had a Nokia phone. Probably nobody has one now. They saw the iPhone launch, they had the signals, but they dismissed touchscreens as a fad. It's hard to know which is a fad, which is just noise, which we'll talk about still today too, versus what's actually a signal of the future. And even though if they thought it was just a fad, they thought it was just noise, they could have said, well, what would happen if that noise became something real? They didn't. They didn't really think about this. And they believed their keyboard-based phones were superior. They missed the smartphone revolution entirely, from market leader to becoming completely irrelevant in 5 years. Finally, another failure at this point was WeWork. With WeWork, the signals were everywhere. They clearly had unsustainable unit economics. They had governance red flags. They had market saturation warnings. Investors, employees, and industry analysts were all raising concerns. But leadership ignored all of these signals, believing their own narrative. I mean, to a degree, they were thinking like a dot-com company, right? Thinking back to what it was in the early 2000s of you're this company that's making losses, but so long as investors keep throwing money at you, you keep going. But they ignored the signals, so many signals. And as a result, they collapsed and they went from a $47 billion valuation to bankruptcy or near bankruptcy. Finally, these stories teach us something. This is where we get into the key insights and the shadow rules preview, just a hint of what we'll talk about next class with shadow rules. That it's not about predicting the future. That's impossible. Anybody who tells you they can predict the exact future and give you a forecast more than 3 years or even 5 years out, they're a charlatan. You just can't do it. Everything could completely change. You could have ideas and you could be right that that thing will come to pass, but to say it with certainty, you can't. So we're looking at foresight. We're looking at what's the range of possibilities. Let's think of the scenarios. Let's use these signals and let's see what they could build into. But something else that impacts that are these shadow rules. These are the hidden systems, algorithms, automated processes, things that shape behavior in unexpected ways. That's what we'll go into next class more. Things like how algorithms, like from Facebook, how they contributed towards mass violence, say in Myanmar, where the algorithms amplified tiny bits of information. When looking at the signals, could have seen how those signals could come together and how the amplification could happen. But without seeing it, these algorithms, these shadow rules took power. Again, the shadow rules we'll talk about more next class. So again, our key insight here, though, is it's not about predicting the future, it's about preparing for multiple future scenarios. So again, in signals, digging a little further into this, we got to think about what is what. The shadow rule example, okay, I've just explained that already. How did engagement algorithms worked? They looked at ethnic tensions, rapid digitalization. These are each signals. And that led to the violence being amplified by those shadow rules. The missed signal was there was human rights warnings that are coming out. There was digital literacy gaps where people didn't know what to believe, what was actually a real signal or a real piece of information or not. And in Myanmar, Facebook's algorithm, it amplified calls for violence, leading to more violence against a particular minority group. Again, an example we'll dig deeper into next time. Some people may have just said, hey, that's just noise. That's just, hey, there's this monk who's calling for violence against that minority group. That's not so significant. But when it got rebroadcast and put to the top by the algorithm on everybody's Facebook feed, it became something more. Some other examples, though, of things that really are noise. Maybe there's a single company that misses earnings. And if they're missing earnings every quarter, maybe that's a trend that's starting to take place. But if it's just once they're missing earnings, that could just be noise, not something significant enough, not important enough to consider a signal. Maybe there's a celebrity having drama on social media, maybe daily stock market fluctuations, individual product recalls. Again, if there's lots of products from that same space or that same sector being recalled, maybe it's a signal. But if it's an individual product being recalled, that could just be noise still. Or temporary supply chain disruptions. Again, could just be noise. Trends are what everybody sees. AI adoption in workplace tools, electric vehicle growth, remote work normalization, aging global population, climate change acceleration. Everyone sees these already. They're already in the media. They're already in the news. Everyone's already talking about them. These aren't signals anymore. These are already trends. They're already happening. They're going to make an impact in the next 1 to 3 years. So these aren't the weak signals. These aren't the things that are still emerging that might take off over time. These are things that are already here. Weak signals, that's our gold mine. That's what we're looking for. So I see stories now about AI agents making autonomous purchases, like maybe an AI agent that's going to go buy my airplane tickets for me, make my booking for me. It's not happening widely yet, but it's starting and it's possible. We see companies paying customers for data. Yeah, that data is so valuable. Instead of just mining it from Facebook or Google or something else, they're paying you individually for your data. And that's starting to happen. Vertical farms aren't common, but they're starting to pop up in urban neighborhoods. Nairobi is one of the best examples of this recently. I've heard people talking about it in Detroit as well. I've had students of mine propose it in Tunis. So it's starting, but it's not there yet. So it's still a weak signal. Corporate mediation mandates. Again, we go to the legal side. What if now instead of things going to court, you have contracts that mandate corporate mediation as the path to decide things? That's starting to be more and more common, still not widespread, but common enough that might be a weak signal for how corporate relations, how our judiciary system or extrajudiciary system is going to function. And then brain-computer interfaces for daily use. Yeah, we've got smart glasses starting to come out. We've got the types of chips that Elon Musk has come up with that have been put into one person so far. But these are really just starting. They're very early, but we see the possibilities of them. So they're still weak signals. And what do we do with these signals? What is our system around these things? Well, we have a method. This is a method that I've developed, but it brings together some tools from various areas of futurism. This is the shift method. So again, shift, the S is signals. So this part of the toolkit, this is just signal mapping. This is systemically scanning for weak signals. We look for these early signals like we just talked about. It's not just reading more news, it's about knowing where to look and what to look for. So Shell, when they were doing this back in the 60s, when other companies were only focused on geology and production, Shell was mapping political and social signals. They knew that these areas outside their business would impact them as well. They noticed rising nationalism in oil-producing countries. They noticed growing environmental awareness. They noticed shifting geopolitical alliances. These weren't oil industry signals, right? This is geopolitics, environment, social issues. These were not oil issues at all normally, but they saw how these broader societal signals would reshape the energy business. Tesla, same thing. They weren't just watching car technology. If they were, they'd be mainly just looking at what's happening with pistons and engines and motors normally, right? But they were tracking battery research. They were tracking climate policy. They were looking at software development. They were looking at changing consumer values. They saw signals across multiple domains and they connected them. So that's our S, that's our signal mapping. We're also going to talk today about a system of how we map them because we break this down into various categories, these signals, so we can sort them better. H is holistic understanding. A single signal is just a data point. The magic happens when we connect the signals across different domains and we see the bigger patterns. Shell connected their political signals with economic trends and technological developments. They saw how nationalism, plus environmental pressure, plus energy security concerns could create a perfect storm. That's holistic thinking. Systems thinking is really what we want to do with this holistic thinking. Tesla connected declining battery costs with increasing climate awareness, with the rise of software-defined products. They saw how these separate trends could converge to create a new market reality. Finally, once we've got these signals and we've started mapping them, we move into interactive futures design. How do we build scenarios with this? How do we build compelling stories about different possible futures? This is something where Shell built detailed scenarios about oil supply disruptions, price volatility, energy transitions. They didn't predict which one would happen. They prepared for all of them. And they said, hey, all of these are a risk. You might say, hey, I'm not a big, massive oil company. I don't have the resources to prepare for every scenario. Okay, but maybe if you prepare for 5 or 6 different scenarios out of the hundreds that are possible, at least you're going to have greater resilience or be more ready when you have to pivot and change. And at least your current strategy will have been stress tested under multiple scenarios, not just one likely scenario. So at least make you more ready. Yeah, all as well. Tesla, they thought about multiple methods for EV adoption. They thought about luxury first. They thought about technology-driven paths. They thought policy mandated paths, so government mandating it happened, cost competitive paths. They built strategies that could work across different scenarios. The Foresight dynamics, this is understanding change forces. Who wins, who loses, who enables the change, who resists it. It's the political economy of the future. So again, politics, social issues, this comes into it. Shell understood that an oil crisis would shift power from companies to nations, from consumers to producers. They prepared for that power shift. Tesla anticipated that early adopters would drive mainstream acceptance, that charging infrastructure would be the key bottleneck, that traditional automakers would be slow to respond, and they planned accordingly. So the T stands for transformational action. This is more what we'll talk about in sessions 3 and to a degree session 4. This is the most important step. Foresight's useless unless it leads to better decisions today. This is where we can convert future foresights into present strategy. So why does it matter is basically what this is doing. What action are we taking out of this? I had an example recently before I go into talking about Shell and Tesla's examples again, where I was talking to someone about drug companies, pharma companies. And we're saying, hey, a lot of these big pharma companies, they think 5 years into the future. They don't think 10, 15 years plus. And they figure once this new technology comes along, there's all these small biotech startups building things. They'll just buy the best products and they'll wait to see who's winning and who's the best ones. They said, why should we act now? Isn't that more what a VC does, investing in these new technologies and these new startups who might be developing new things? I would say, rather, if you wait, you're the last one to buy whatever's left over. Your competitors will have bought what the leading companies are in that space. If it's M&A as your path to growth, they'll have found those ideas earlier and started acting on them. Yeah, you can wait until things become a trend, but then you're the last to act. Maybe you're better than Kodak, who didn't act on it at all, but you're late to the game. Why not be early? Why not be one of the first movers? Especially if you're a company that's an industry leader, this is your path to stay an industry leader. So the transformational action is what matters, not just doing these what ifs and being ready and being resilient, but taking action. So you're the architect of your future, not just waiting to see what happens and reacting to it. So again, this is where Shell, they built flexible supply chains, they diversified their energy portfolio, they developed scenario-based planning processes. They didn't just think about the future, they prepared. Tesla, they invested in charging infrastructure. They invested in battery manufacturing. They invested in software capabilities. They made bets based on their scenarios. They could have lost, but they hedged their bets enough to be balanced, and they built the capabilities they would need for different futures. So they were flexible to go different directions if they needed to. So that shift, signal mapping, holistic understanding, interactive futures design, foresight dynamics, and transformational action. Again, today we're talking mainly about signal mapping and holistic understanding. And that's what we've started with signal mapping. And the latter part of today's class, we'll get into interactive futures design. So within our signal mapping, the main area that we're doing, issue we need to do is first, is we map our signals into categories. And this is how we can analyze them, how we can look for trends, we can see what things impact each other. But If I gather 10 new signals a day, and after a month, I've got 300 signals, and they're across all different sectors, all different industries, how do I make sense of them? Well, step one is I categorize them. So, steeple is one simple way to do this. Again, steeple S is social, T is technological, E is economic, the second E is environmental, P is political, and L is legal. And we differentiate between legal and political. So, to give you examples, this will make it more clear. This is something where S, the social changes, this is changes in demographics, values, behaviors, cultural patterns. Right now, things I'm watching, Gen Z preferring AI tutors to human teachers in some learning contexts, corporate mediation becoming mandatory at a few forward-thinking companies, multi-generational workforces creating entirely new workforce dynamics, and technology. I'm sure all of you have lots of examples, but a few could be AI agents making autonomous purchases. There's a few startups doing this already, like experimenting with AI buying household supplies. It'd be great if they buy my new cleaning supplies, keep track of what I need. It's an easy, low risk thing to automate. Brain computer interfaces, moving from medical applications to consumer productivity tools. So, what if you could supercharge your brain with a chip? It sounds a little sci-fi, but sci-fi is where we get our inspiration very often for things in the future in space. And quantum computing. I'm watching and waiting as we see that transition from research labs into business applications. It's not there yet, but that's an early signal. It's coming. Economic signals, new business models, market shifts, financial patterns. We can look at companies paying customers for the data instead of harvesting it for free. We can look at carbon removal becoming a profitable industry rather than just a cost. We can let subscription models expand to everything, cars, clothes, even home. Imagine if you had a subscription model for home, it's possible. And that's starting. I've seen that with some co-living spaces, but what if that came to a house? What if for a car, you just, when you need the car, you pay to use it. When you don't need the car, you don't. What if I'm traveling a lot? I have a subscription model, almost like a timeshare in some ways. If when I'm in a certain city, I have access to that same house. When I'm not there, I don't. So environmental signals, climate resources, sustainability innovations. So again, this is vertical farms appearing in certain urban neighborhoods, not just rural areas. Look at ocean plastic, maybe becoming a premium manufacturing material. Companies are working on this. And imagine if we could harvest all of the ocean plastic, get it out of the sea, and make that into a building material with the durability and the longevity of plastic. Could that make our buildings even last longer? Would it even be better? Weather modification experiments by municipal governments is another environmental signal. Politically, there's so much happening, too much almost happening even. But policy experiments, regulatory shifts, geopolitical moves. So AI systems are being granted legal rights and personhood in some jurisdictions. Digital citizenship programs by micronations that are competing with traditional countries. Yeah, if I'm a digital citizen of Estonia, what rights does that give me? Algorithmic governance experiments where AI helps make municipal decisions. And it's a slippery slope of letting AI make more and more and more policy decisions. And do we get to a point, Harari talks in his book Nexus about the point where maybe we don't understand the policy decisions AI is making for us anymore, and we just fully cede power to AI? And L for legal signals, court decisions, new legislation, rights expansions. So there could be algorithmic transparency laws that require companies to explain AI decisions. Like, what if my AI is making all the decisions on giving me a loan or an admission to university, and there's no person to explain it? Maybe it's looking at many more data points than an individual human could consider. Maybe it's considering much more for my loan than just my credit score. Maybe it's considering even, did I make my loan application from a computer or from a smartphone? Was the battery on my phone charged at the time? What level was it charged? Yeah, so what does my social media look like? It could be a massive amount of things that are considered. Right to repair legislation is gaining momentum globally. What does that mean? I saw yesterday as well in the textile space in regards to production, a new law that was passed by the EU saying companies in the textile space and fashion space in general, they have to show how they're going to mitigate the waste from their products. And they'll actually get bonuses if they make products that are more durable, that last longer. So if I've got something that's fast fashion, the company I bought it from has to make sure that they have a plan for how it'll be recycled if I'm buying it here in Europe. I'm in France right now. Or if I've got jeans that are more durable, my Levi's might last me 5, 10 years. I do keep my Levi's a really long time. And the company will benefit because the clothing they've provided me is more durable and it lasts a long time, as opposed to something where it rips, it tears, it needs to be trashed, and they need to either pay for its being trashed or pay for it being recycled in some manner. So these are big changes coming. And corporate liability for AI decisions. What if companies start to become responsible for AI decisions, and which companies? Who is responsible? So these are legal signals we're looking at. So the key insight here is that most of the important changes happen at the intersection of these categories, not just where one of these categories is acting, but where we see two or more factors crossing over between categories. So Tesla's success, they came from connecting the signals from tech, battery improvement, social, climate awareness, and economic, changing cost structures, with political signals, supportive policies. So that's why signal mapping is just the first step in shift, but we need a holistic understanding to see how these signals connect. So again, this is something where you might think, hey, I work in retail or I work in pharma. This is my space. I only look at the signals in my industry. But this is where we see the importance really of looking across industries, across spaces, at least having a general awareness of what's out there. Another activity that we do sometimes is having making sense exercises. And this is where we might look at the big list. I've shared with you a list before, and I'll put it up in the chat and the email again too, of all the signals that I've been collecting. And other participants in this class have started adding to as well. And previous and following sessions, the classes will be adding to, of just signals that we see and categorizing them, which of these categories they fall into. And a making sense exercise can be a handful of people or a large group of people sitting and talking about, hey, does this one make sense? Is this really a signal? Is this important? What impact would it have? By yourself, you can get so far thinking about these signals, but with a group of experts, either from your industry or from across diverse industries or diverse regions and different perspectives, you might see that some of these signals actually make more sense or make more of an impact than you thought, or less. And so this can be an exercise, and we could do some of these outside of class as well, or of facilitating a discussion where we say, hey, here's the signals that seem like the most relevant to us. One of the things we're looking to do is making a newsletter where people can subscribe and get updates on these signals and what I think is happening with them, what's important, what's not important. And, or even better, if we have more people participating than just me, to get more expertise, more perspectives. And that's something we've talked about too, as an idea for the mastermind group that will be coming after this class, to be able to have that be a space to meet, to talk about these signals. So if we were in this big group, if we were doing this live, I would now have you guys pause to do a live signal hunting exercise. The tool that I'll share with all of you is our collaborative Google Sheet tracker. Eventually, this will be moved to Notion, but for now, we've got this in Google. It's already got, I believe, about 180 signals listed there by category, and I keep adding to this daily. I want you to look for 1 to 2 week signals. You can either use my tracker, which is already got them categorized, or you can just go search the news, search Reddit, search scientific journals, search wherever you want, and come up with some new signals. And look for tensions between the old and the new ways. You can follow venture capital of what they're looking at, crazy ideas. You can notice what surprises you. You can hunt for shadow rules and algorithmic effects. Think of what that might be, what's happening there. Like the TikTok algorithm, is it going to change? US investors will now be owning TikTok. I don't know if it's going to be all of it or just the part operating in the US, but will they use still the same algorithm from China, or will they have a new algorithm? And what's the impact of that, for example? So the format to put these in, I want you to document these with the signal name, a brief description, a link to where you got the signal, which steeple category is it in, and why did it catch your attention? So again, if we're doing this live, we'd be doing that a quick roundtable of what are the most interesting finds. As it is, I suggest you pause this, write these down. You can email me, we can set up a discussion, and we can figure out how to hash through the signals that you've come across. So from signals to scenarios, the 2x2 method, this is something significant that we're going to go through, of how we connect our signals and how we make use of them. Oh, actually, we're not at the scenarios yet. I'm sorry. Let me take a step back. I do want to tell you a little more of the signal hunting exercise. So some more notes. If you're looking at social signals, look for changing behaviors, generational differences, new social movements, shifts in values. You want to check social media trends, demographic studies, lifestyle publications, stuff you, in some cases, lifestyle publications, maybe you're reading anyway, and you realize, hey, actually, that thing in Vogue or in Cosmo, that's actually a signal that matters. For technological signals, look at early stage innovations, unexpected applications of existing technology, convergence between technologies. Check tech blogs, check patent databases, check startup funding announcements. For economic signals, try to spot new business models, look for unusual market movements, look at shifts in how value is created and captured, look at venture capital investments, economic research, look at industry reports. For environmental signals, notice sustainability innovations, resource scarcity issues, climate adaptation strategies, check environment publications, scientific journals, policy announcements. For political signals, you can track policy experiments, regulatory changes, or geopolitical shifts. You can monitor government websites, policy think tanks, international relations coverage. The political signals will be in the newspapers already too, but often if it's in the mainstream press, if it's on the cover of the New York Times, it's already a trend. It's not necessarily a signal anymore. Similar with legal signals, landmark court cases are an example, but those landmark court cases are already moving towards a trend because they're already in the press, already widely covered. But what about new legislation? What about changes in legal frameworks? Check legal publications, check regulatory announcements, check rights advocacy organizations, see what they're saying, see what they're advocating for. And we've talked about how to document them. Some examples to talk through more of these. Maybe there's wellness-based compensation models, the companies piloting salary structures where your pay correlates with measurable stress reduction and mental health improvements, or even your physical health. But companies might see you're a more productive worker if you're healthier. So if you keep yourself in good health mentally and physically, maybe they give you more payment. There's some companies already piloting this. This would be a social and economic change. And why it caught my attention, I'd say, well, it challenges my fundamental assumptions about productivity and compensation. It could transform workplace culture, right? So now I'd have you pause, go look for some samples of this, and then I'm going to move on. So in this case, since we're not doing this live, I'm going to move directly on. And we would do a quick roundtable if we were live. And then from here, I'd go into holistic understanding, the age of shift, connecting your signals. So signal mapping, again, gives us the raw material, but that what if, why is it important? This is holistic understanding. This is where the magic happens. This is where we see the individual signals connecting across domains and creating bigger patterns of change. So let's look at some of these across some of these categories in the steeple space. So let's say we're looking at the remote work ecosystem. Let's look at signals from all 6 categories that connected to make this massive shift. The social signal is the changing work-life balance expectations, especially among younger workers. The technological signal, collaboration software, reaching maturity, Zoom, Slack, cloud computing. These things are this tech that's making it just more and more possible simply to do this. Environmental signals, reduced commuting emissions, becoming a corporate sustainability metric. Like the fact that if you could say, hey, my workers aren't creating as many emissions coming to and from work. We can do that if they're not commuting at all, right? Or commuting less. The economic signal, commercial and real estate values are declining. Companies need less office space. And that's one of the signals we can see, like, hey, there's less demand for commercial real estate. We can look at the political signals, tax policy changes. Governments have to adopt to distributed workforces. Yet, if my job was in New York City, but I lived in Jersey, and I'm not commuting into New York at all anymore, and I'm fully working from Jersey now, or maybe I moved to Montana and still have my job in New York, how is that going to change the tax structure and what revenues are going to what municipalities? So none of these signals alone predicted the work revolution, but when you connect them, you see convergence. Oh, and last I forgot was the legal signal, employment law adaptations for managing distributed teams across jurisdictions. So maybe employment law also needs to adjust. So again, companies that saw these connections like Zoom, they were positioned to thrive. Companies that weren't have struggled. Another example, the personalized medicine revolution. So this is another list of signals going through Steeple. I found a group of signals for that each one of these. So maybe there's a social signal of consumer demand for health optimization and preventative care, a technological signal. AI diagnostic capabilities are advancing rapidly. Genetic testing is becoming more affordable. We can see what's coming around the corner of what's in your history by the genetic tests. The economic signal, the healthcare cost pressures are intensifying. Healthcare, especially in North America, is so expensive, and value-based care models start to emerge. The environmental signal, pollution and health connections are becoming clear. Environmental health tracking is important. The political signal, healthcare policy debates, focusing on prevention and access. The legal signal, there's more medical data privacy regulations evolving, patient rights are expanding. And each one of these signals could be a 20, 30-minute discussion too, right? But we're just looking at them all quickly, saying, hey, all these things came together. And the impact of this is we see a future of more individualized predictive healthcare companies. They're not there yet, but they're coming. The companies that did connect the dots, like 23andMe, unfortunately not doing well anymore, Tempus, Guardant Health, these are building the future of medicine. So with holistic understanding, we can take those individual signals and see what seems might be random or unimportant, and we can map them. We can put them together systemically, and we can look for connections. Yeah, each of these two examples I gave you, I picked out the signals and I put them together with those connected. But normally, if we got that long list of 100, 200 signals, yeah, it's not that you directly see immediately which is connected to which. You have to map them out and see which ones go together, and then see what future could that lead to. What connections are you seeing? And as you look back at what you've done in your own exercise, think about spots that you've or signals you've spotted that might be part of a bigger pattern. Now we go to how do we actually make scenarios out of this? This is from signals to scenarios, the 2x2 method, how to identify our critical uncertainties. So a 2x2 matrix is something where we'd have and the X and the Y axis, a different label. And we use this as a tool to see how these two different axes would interact with each other. And we make 4 quadrants in here. You could even make 6 or 8 or more, I suppose, if you had more categories or made this 3D somehow. But in this case, we're just the simplest of the 2x2 scenario matrix. And we take 2 critical uncertainties from our signals, 2 things that we're not sure of, that we don't know if it will happen or not. And we have uncertainties we're looking at with our scenarios. We have drivers. Drivers are things we know are driving change that are happening already. The uncertainties, or as the name implies, things we're uncertain of. And we take 2 uncertainties. We pick 2 that are some of the most important from our signals. We explore what kind of futures they'd create, and we can map how our signals would impact each of these as well. So let's say we're thinking about the future of work. I think I've got that example as well as another on the screen. Oh, I've already got, yes, the future of work is up there. So with our signals tracker, we could say uncertainty 1 could be the role of AI, and uncertainty 2 could be work organization. And by the role of AI, I mean, will it augment human capabilities or will it replace human workers? So will we be super productive humans, or will we all get universal basic income and sit at home because AI does all the work? Or the other uncertainty, work organization. Will work become more centralized in traditional companies? And will people go back to work, go back to the office, and becomes a more centralized future? Or will it become more distributed with people working through platforms, maybe being members of a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, more freelancing? Which will work be centralized or decentralized? Will AI replace us or augment us? So now we look at this and we see scenario 1 could be AI augmented corporate work. We're still in traditional companies, but we're AI enhanced employees. Think of consultants with AI research assistants, engineers with AI coding partners. The corporate structure remains, but human capabilities are amplified. And we have 4 scenarios for each of these, but we're not going to talk about this in detail here because we simply don't have the space. But if we were to build a scenario for each of these scenarios, I would do a breakout group. I would have a team of 5 to 10 people talking about each of these scenarios, maybe a half hour, an hour, and then coming back to the big group, presenting their findings. I've got a whole worksheet for each scenario of the types of questions you asked to dig deeper. How would you feel? How would it impact you? How would it impact your business? How would it impact your customers, your clients, if we're living in that scenario? So in scenario 2, we can look at this of saying, okay, we've combined these 2 uncertainties. So we've got the AI augmenting us still, but the work is now distributed. So we don't have the traditional workplace. We have distributed decentralized work. So we've got enhanced freelancers and micro entrepreneurs using AI tools. Imagine independent consultants with AI that handles research, scheduling, client communication. They don't need a team anymore because they've got AI. creators that use AI to help with content production, audience engagement. So no more big, massive companies or less of them, but these AI enhanced individual contributors who are out there working as freelancers or maybe as small groups, but without the need for all the administrative infrastructure of a traditional company. Scenario 3 could be AI replaces corporate work. You have highly automated corporations with minimal human workforces, just massive factories run by AI, massive even information companies, tech companies, finance companies, mainly run by AI with few human employees. Essentially AI systems with human oversight, automated customer service, AI-driven decision-making, algorithmic management. A fourth scenario could be AI replaces distributed work. So it's both a platform-based gig economy and AI does most of the work. And humans just handle some exceptions. Imagine Uber where AI drives most cars or food delivery where drones handle most deliveries. So each scenario would require completely different strategies for your company, right? So even if you're not, well, this is in every industry, right? So whatever industry you're in, like how would your company work? How would it function in each of those scenarios? If you're in scenario 1, you'd invest in human AI collaboration tools. Whereas in scenario 4, you'd want to have platform ownership and some employees for exception handling. We'll talk through another example of healthcare. So let's say we have two uncertainties again. One uncertainty is care delivery. Will it be centralized in hospitals like today, or will it be distributed to homes? Is that going to be a lower cost thing maybe of home healthcare instead? Decision making. Will human doctors still make decisions like today, or will everything be decided by AI with AI diagnosis? So quadrant 1, top left, we've got human-led hospital care. So it's still humans that are involved, and we're still using the hospitals. So our one axis, the x-axis is hospital care versus distributed to homes. The y-axis is human doctors versus AI diagnosis. So in this traditional model, we could say there's traditional model with better technology. Doctors are still there. They're still central. Hospitals invest in advanced equipment. Human expertise is premium. Think of the Mayo Clinic, but with better tech even than today. Now, human-led home care. Doctors are making house calls, portable diagnostic tech. The technology makes all these big machines in the hospital smaller and easier to be mobile. Maybe your smartphone can do everything. Physicians become mobile. Homes become mini clinics. Personal relationships drive care. I think concierge medicine scaled up. Wow, that would be lovely if we could have that. I think we need a lot more doctors though, or anyway, to see how that would work. AI-led hospital care could be another model. Centralized diagnosis using AI diagnosis with human oversight. Hospitals become like AI diagnostic centers. Doctors are like AI supervisors. They don't see individual patients. They supervise the AI. Efficiency and accuracy drive value. Think radiology departments, like they are now, very AI use, but for everything. Doctors oversee it, but the AI and maybe some low-level technicians who handle the AI tools, they're doing everything. Finally, quadrant 4 could be AI-led home care. AI doctors in every home, hospitals for emergencies only. Your phone diagnoses you, your phone prescribes a treatment, the treatment's automated, it gets delivered from your pharmacy, but maybe even Amazon. And you would just go to the hospital if there's a trauma, a big crisis. Alexa or your iPhone could just be diagnosing and handling everything, right? So each scenario has, again, very different implications. If you'd invest in human expertise in quadrant 4, or you'd invest in AI platforms, and I'm sorry, quadrant 1, you'd have human expertise. Quadrant 4, you'd be fully in on AI platforms and emergency capabilities. So your turn. I want you to build your own 2x2 scenario matrix for your industry. Look at signals from our tracker and think about which signals we've captured and think about your industry. What are the two biggest uncertainties that could shape two very different futures, or four rather very different futures, but what are the two biggest things you're uncertain of that you think are making an impact on your industry? And these things could go either way. Create your axes, put one uncertainty on the horizontal axis, the other on the vertical. Make sure they're truly independent, that they're not things that drive each other, that they're really independent of each other. And name your 4 quadrants. So give each scenario a memorable name that captures the essence of that future. And flesh out one quadrant. Pick the most interesting scenario and describe what that world would actually look like. Do this in great detail, like really have a fully imagined thing. Spend at least 5 or 10 minutes on each of these quadrants. really think what it would look like if the world happened that way and what it would impact your business. And after that, we would come back together as a group and discuss it. Again, I'm recording this. We're not doing the session live. So this is something where if you want to share this with me, you can email me what you've put together, maybe take a picture if you've drawn a 2x2 quadrant on paper, share that with me. We can discuss it and we can figure out how to go from there. When we go onwards from here, we go to test our scenarios. We look at the power questions of what signals point toward this future, who wins and who loses in that scenario. This is part of our foresight dynamics. What assumptions does this challenge? This idea that we need to go to the hospital, that we need to even have hospitals, it challenges that idea in that last scenario, right? And what would you do differently today if this were the future? So what I want you to do with your own company, your own industry, is pick the most likely scenario and the most challenging scenario. And what's your strategy for each? Okay, so the most likely one is the one you think is going to happen. Most likely, maybe 60% sure that's going to happen. Maybe the others seem less likely to you. So what is your strategy? And does your strategy change based on this scenario? Because maybe you're thinking now 1 to 3 years out. What about this 10-year vision of what's most likely? Does that change your strategy? And maybe another one of these four is unlikely, but the most challenging one. Maybe it is likely and challenging, but whatever's the most challenging one, what's your strategy for that one? Let's stress test it and see, does your current strategy meet and respond to this challenging scenario, or does it need to change? Does it need to be something else? So within this, we've mapped out these 4 different areas. I want to talk a little more going back to what we've had of the foresight dynamics of the examples we just did of the AI-led home care, and that's a great example. How would that change? Technology companies that are giving AI diagnostic tools, they would be winners in this, right? Patients who are getting AI-led home care, they might win because it's more convenient, it's more personalized, you're not waiting at the hospital. Home care providers and medical device companies would be winners. Insurance companies who are reducing costs, but maybe still collecting big premiums, they're winning as well. Who are the losers? Well, traditional hospitals, right? They've massive real estate investments, massive investments in capital and technology and machines. And they're losing from this AI home-based software system. Specialists maybe are losing referral volume because maybe there's just less need for them because these AI-based tools can do all these things you normally need a specialist for. Medical device companies that used to focus on big hospital equipment, if my iPhone or my Samsung device can do everything, those big medical device companies are not winning. And healthcare administrators, if I'm the administrative person who's used to running the hospital and all the admin tasks, there's not as need for as many administrators as there used to be. The hospital bureaucracy will shrink. Enablers, what could enable this from happening? Regulatory approval would be needed for these AI diagnostic tools to prove that something happening outside the hospital is as strong and is as useful as what's happening in the hospital. Insurance coverage for home-based care, that would help enable it, that you don't have to go to the hospital, that home-based care counts and your insurance will pay it. The technology maturation and reliability, simply as the tech gets better and better and better, that will help make this more possible. And the patient acceptance. On the social aspect, will patients accept that a smartphone told them what their illness is, as opposed to seeing a doctor in front of them? Will they trust that? And resistors, what's going to stop this? What's trying to block this? Well, the medical establishment certainly will want to protect its professional authority. The hospital industry wants to protect its current revenue streams. Liability lawyers that are concerned about AI malpractice. Yes, I've got a sibling who's a medical malpractice lawyer, and I can imagine many people similar to him in that space looking at how they make money in the current industry and will that change? And unions representing hospital workers. If big physical hospitals don't need to be there anymore, and we've got all this home-based care and even AI-based tools doing the care, do we need less nurses? Do we need less hospital technicians? So maybe those unions might oppose this as well. Maybe the role changed to something else. That could also be a case. So this analysis tells us how this scenario could actually unfold. Change doesn't happen automatically. It's driven by the winners and enabled by favorable conditions. And those who are winning in the status quo are going to resist it. Understanding the dynamics helps us anticipate the path of change and position ourselves accordingly. Maybe I'm a hospital administrator and am I going to resist this? Am I going to be the Kodak of my industry? Or am I going to be the one who says, hey, my job as a hospital administrator is going to diminish, but let's make the changes now so my organization is at the forefront of this change. So pick one of the scenarios again for your 2x2. Look at who are the winners, who are the losers, who are the enablers, who are the resistors. Especially want you to do this for your industry. We've just done this for the hospital space. Look at your industry and see what are the changes that are possible, what are the scenarios in that 2x2 scenario. Maybe how we just did, what's the most likely one and what's the most challenging one, and you've mapped your strategy for that. I would say pick one of those, pick that most likely scenario, or rather maybe pick that most challenging one, because maybe the most likely one doesn't have that many resistors and has lots of enablers already because it's likely. But maybe there's a really desirable scenario. It's maybe one of those two you've looked at already, but maybe it's something different. What's that most desirable scenario for you? And who will be the winners, losers, enablers, and resistors in that space? Again, this tool, this is the power of Foresight dynamics. It moves us from abstract scenarios to actually understanding the real forces that shape the change. And we're going to look, last thing, at one last creative tool for interactive futures design. This is something very different. This is flipped futures. It's a 3-step method, and it's something that really just flips everything we know to be true on its head and just looks at the complete opposite of it. This is something where it often makes us go from incremental changes to something just much bigger, right? And much different than what we know to be true today. And in this sense, since we're not looking at incremental changes, it allows us to look way into the future and say, okay, is this even possible? Easiest way to explain this is to talk through it. So let's say first thing you do, you pick a domain. You pick a domain, you pick a topic, you pick a specific thing. You could pick something like universities or higher education, like we have on the screen. You could pick something simple like shoes, which we can talk through as well. Automobiles, whatever it is, you pick that topic and you think of 2 to 3 things in our short example, 2 to 3 items that are clearly true. There's no debate. It's not opinion. It's not green cars are better than red cars. It's cars have 4 wheels, something that there's no debate about right now. And then we're going to say the complete opposite. So it can't be an opinion. It can't be what you like and don't like. It's something that's definitely true that everyone can agree upon. If you were to do this with your team as a bigger exercise, you wouldn't stop with 2 or 3 things. You would come up with, say, 50 facts or 100 facts that are true about your industry today. And then we'd think of those complete opposites. So we flip each truth. We say, whatever is the complete opposite, no matter how absurd it might sound, what is the complete opposite of what you know today to be true about this domain that you're talking about? And then once we have these complete opposites, we would talk through what could it take to make this be true in 10 years? With the idea of a 10-year time frame being everything could change. It was 10 years from when Facebook launched to when it hit 1 billion users. So what could happen? Think about how massive that change was in our communications over those 10 years and our social interactions. What could happen in 10 years? Almost anything could happen in 10 years. So what would you say is possible step by step if you were coming backwards from those flipped futures 10 years from now to make them possible? What would be the steps that would need to happen today to move towards that? So we look at the higher education example. Current truths about higher education. Students, at least mainly in North America at least, pay universities for their degrees. Obviously in Europe, there's much different case for universities. Learning happens mainly in classrooms on campus, and professors are human experts who teach students. So our flipped futures could be universities are paying students to learn, classrooms come to students wherever they are, and AI professors teach human assistants. Now, these all might seem improbable, and they're not incremental changes, and it would take a big change to get to that point. But let's explore them. What would it take where universities could pay students to learn? Maybe there's a future world where talent is so scarce that institutions compete for the best learners. Maybe the data generated by the learning is so valuable that the data that's tracked and created when you're learning, when you're studying, is so valuable, it funds the education. Maybe the knowledge creation is so critical to economic competitiveness, the government subsidizes learning directly. Like the research, the hands-on things you're doing as you're studying chemistry and you're doing hands-on experiments, and that learning contributes so much to growth globally that governments are subsidizing you learning in their university, in their country, as opposed to somewhere else. The idea of classrooms coming to the students, yeah, this could make virtual reality and augmented reality, this things could make location irrelevant. Maybe AI tutors adapt each student's schedule and learning style. Maybe micro-learning experiences are embedded in daily life. Learning is truly customized to what you feel you need. And AI professors to teach human assistants. Yeah, maybe AI becomes the repository of all knowledge. Humans provide wisdom, creativity, and emotional intelligence, but the role is flipped completely. So we see how these flipping of assumptions could open up entirely different futures. These aren't predictions. We're not saying this will happen, but these are kind of provocations to stretch our thinking beyond incremental change. We could take some of these things and work backwards and build scenarios around them too, and figure out step by step how we get to it. But this is something where maybe you even say, "Hey, I'm challenging my team. I'm a business leader with an MBA, and I don't know the science behind what my team is doing, but I've got this new idea. I want to challenge them." Kind of like Kennedy's challenge to put a man on the moon. Yeah, what would it take for us to do this in 10 years? I've got this big idea. I think it could change the world. Let's build a team that can make this possible in a decade from now. So I would ask you as well, as part of your after class assignment or after video assignment, to think of some flip futures of your own. Write down 3 to 5 things that are true about your industry or your product or your company. Then write those flip futures, write the complete opposites, and then decide which of those futures are likely or unlikely, and which are desirable versus undesirable. And what would be the steps that could make these things possible? And for those that are likely but undesirable, what could you do today to be the architect of your future and prevent that thing from happening? For those that are unlikely but highly desirable, what could you do today to start shifting towards that future? So something I want you to think about, both flip futures and 2x2 scenarios are really key tools for interactive futures design for the I in shift. So we use them together to create a rich portfolio of possible futures. We're going to talk briefly now about the transformative action. We don't have separate slides for that because that's what we're going to talk about more on session 3. But transformative action, this is something where it's what we've done isn't useful until it leads to actions and better decisions today. So we ask ourselves the right strategic questions. What would you do differently if scenario A were to happen? What investments would make scenario B more likely? What capabilities do we need to work across all these scenarios? What early warning indicators should we monitor to see which of these scenarios we've created is emerging? And so again, back to our healthcare example, if AI-led home care is the future, invest in AI diagnostic partnerships today, or develop home care delivery capabilities, or build patient data platforms and analytics, or train staff in AI collaboration in home care. If I think human-led hospital care continues, then I'll upgrade my hospital technology systems. I'll invest heavily in human expertise and training. I'll build exceptional patient experience capabilities. I'll develop specialized care centers. So instead of it being decentralized, I'll develop the care centers. If I think about my strategy, what would be a robust strategy that works across most scenarios? Well, I should, no matter what, build strong patient-based and trust-based patient relationships. I should develop world-class data and analytics capabilities, whether home healthcare or hospital-based healthcare, decentralized or centralized. That world-class data analytics is going to be key. If I'm thinking about creating flexible care delivery models, that's something that's going to be important no matter what. If I'm decentralized, if I'm hospital-centered, I want to be flexible. I want to be ready to respond. And I want to invest in both human capabilities and AI partnerships, because no matter what, in the next 3 to 5 years, both will be important. That long term, that 10, 15-year model where maybe home care becomes the new thing, hospital is less important. No matter what, the technology and the human capabilities in the medium term, at least, are still important. What are the early warning indicators I'm going to monitor to see which scenario might be emerging? I'm going to look at regulatory approval rates for AI diagnostic tools. Are these AI home-based tools starting to get approved? I'm going to look at, will insurance coverage work with home-based care? Are insurance companies starting to say they would cover treatment at home? Or is it something where they still want a clinical or hospital-based system? I'm going to look at patient satisfaction scores of AI care versus human care. If patients are showing more and more comfort and happiness and satisfaction with AI-based care, well, maybe that's a trend or an early signal that that's what's emerging. And I'm going to look at technology reliability and accuracy metrics. Some tests have shown AI-based tools to perform better than doctors. And if that continues and if that accentuates, maybe that's something I need to look at as a signal. So again, this is something where we look at a strategy that's robust across multiple futures, but still leaving us ready to pivot as we see which signal leads to which scenarios emerging. So again, I want you to look at your most likely scenario from your 2x2 scenario you built earlier. And I want you to look at what are 3 specific actions you could take this quarter. What are the key indicators you should monitor? And what are the capabilities you need to build? This is where foresight meets strategy. This is where we put it into action. So the shift method isn't just about thinking about the future, it's about acting on those insights today. When you practice this regularly, you'll start seeing opportunities and threats before your competitors do. The last thing, I want to talk about how we're going to build your personal foresight practice. You've got these powerful new tools. How are we going to look at them? So I want you to use the S of signal mapping, use the steeple framework to systematically scan for weak signals. Keep looking across the horizon, for weak signals across all domains, not just your own industry individually, but spend 10 minutes once a week. Once a week for 10 minutes isn't that much, right? Look for signals that might surprise you. Holistic understanding. Now take some time and look at the signals you found. Look at last week's signals, look at this week's signals, look what you did 2 weeks ago, and see how changes in one domain might affect the others. Start to think of these things in systems, not just silos. So it's not, I've got these steeple silos of social and technology and economic environment, et cetera. But I want to start looking across systematically how these different signals I've found are impacting each other. Maybe form a team or join a mastermind and do this as a group with others, or do it with your management team at your office. Interactive futures design. This is where we start building 2x2 scenarios. It takes a little more effort to do this, I know, but look at your critical uncertainties and build these scenarios. Start testing your strategy within this. How will your strategy hold up in each of these scenarios? If you want help with this, let me know. We can work out a plan to do this with your team and build these scenarios together and talk through and do research of how your company holds up in each of these cases. And then when those 2x2 scenarios, we also, or in addition to that, we want to look at flip futures. Let's challenge our assumptions. Challenge what you know to be true about your industry and how could it change? And how would you want it to change? Look at the foresight dynamics, the F of shift. For each scenario, map the winners, map the losers, the enablers, the resistors. Understand who are the forces that would drive or resist change. In a lot of industries, this is pretty obvious, but sometimes as you map it out, you think of others that wouldn't have immediately come to your mind. And especially if you do this with an interdisciplinary team, you might get some new ideas beyond what you normally would think of. So I'm also going to send out a shift worksheet, and that guides you through each step of your own challenges. And there's a workbook as well. And you can use this as the method for real strategic issues. And really just look at a real thing you're dealing with and figure out how to do this. Now, spend 20 minutes a week on the shift practice, just 10 minutes on signal mapping, signal scanning, and 10 minutes connecting the dots and updating the scenarios you've built. It's like going to the gym for your strategic mind. In our next session, we're going to talk about shadow rules, the hidden systems and algorithms that increasingly shape our world. We'll also talk about advanced AI-enhanced foresight techniques. I have sent out by email to many of you a link to our WhatsApp community. If you're in September cohort of this class, you've gotten that message. If not, write a comment, especially if you're listening to this on Facebook. I'll create a separate group for you and you can join there and have a community to map these and discuss these in. Now, final challenge, use the complete shift method on one strategic challenge you're facing. Start with signal scanning this week, build scenarios next week, identify 3 actions you can take this month. I'll see you in class before then, obviously, but start doing this process. Send me questions as you have them. Share in the WhatsApp group so your classmates can also give feedback. Thank you for your energy and engagement to whoever's watching this video. you're now equipped to see the future and the present. Again, we're not forecasting the future, but to see possibilities for the future, to see the range of what could happen and to act on those insights. So go forth and be architects of the future now.